Welcome to Coming from Left Field, where we have conversations about politics, books, and current events with your host, Greg Goddles and Pat Cummings. On September 2nd, 2020, Christopher Rufo from the far right-wing Heritage Foundation and Claremont Institute joined the Tucker Carlson Tonight show on Fox News. Rufo announced that after 6 months of research, it's absolutely astonishing how critical race theory has pervaded every aspect of the federal government. As always, President Trump was watching Fox News and the next day invited Rufo to the White House. This resulted in Executive Order 13950 declaring an end to any training on critical race theory and white privilege, or propaganda that teaches the United States is an inherently racist or evil country. And just like that, a virus was released from the lab. And the latest variant, Project 2025, book bans, calls to dismantle the Department of Education. Let's discuss. Well, warm greetings, everybody. We are back with Jesse Hagopian, and we had you on about a little more than, I don't know, not quite a year ago with your book, More Than a Test Score. And I had so much fun chatting with my educators about that book, kind of taking on the educational industry and the problem with our fetish about test scores being the end all to solving our problems. And welcome back to the podcast. This officially makes you a friend of the show, being on the second podcast.
Right on. Thanks for having me back.
Greg is in Pittsburgh. I'm in Tacoma. And are you in Seattle?
I am.
Well, good, good. Hey, I want to talk to you about your book here, which is Teach Truth, your brand new book. And let me tell you how I got to know this book. And you were on Democracy Now! Just a week or so ago. And Amy Goodman really did a great interview with you and actually extended the interview on the web format. The second part of the interview was, I think, it was good, if not better, than the first part. And they mentioned your book, Teaching Truth, The Struggle for Anti-Racist Education. Tell us a little bit about this book, Jesse.
This book is my rebuttal to everything Donald Trump has in store for education. It is the culmination of my 20 years of teaching in the classroom at the elementary, middle, and high school level. And this book is also the fulfillment of my promise to my ancestors that I would never lie to my students or to the public about their experience surviving enslavement on plantations in Mississippi and Louisiana. And right when I began writing this book in 2021, within the first couple weeks, my dad discovered which plantation our family had been enslaved on. And so when we eventually were able to make it down to the plantation, I was able to help with a ceremony to honor our ancestors. And me and my dad and my brother all made a promise to our ancestors there at a gravesite on the plantation where they had buried each other that we would never conceal the pain and the trauma and all of the horrific abuse that they endured on that land. And we also wouldn't hide the incredible struggle for freedom that they were part of. And so this book is about fulfilling that promise by showing educators and students and parents who are resisting what I call in the book truth crime laws. These are laws that ban honest education about Black history, about Indigenous history, histories of people of color and working class people, and LGBTQ plus identity. All of these kinds of lessons are being banned across the country, but there's an incredible tradition of resistance throughout US history to these kinds of bans. And there's incredible stories today of educators fighting back, students and families fighting back, and this book collects those stories of resistance, and helps people see how we can reclaim education and transform it to be about uplifting all of our youth, telling the truth about stories that are often excluded from the corporate textbooks, and building a struggle to erase all of these truth crime laws.
You know, your introduction was just so wonderful. You start with you discovering your dad discovering this, and as a struggle for you to get down to Morgantown, Mississippi, but you made it. And I can't. I guess I would if I was Jewish and I took my family and we went to Auschwitz. I mean, you'd be changed by that. Here
Yeah.
you are standing on the land where your ancestors were owned by other people. It had to be just a life-changing emotional experience. Am I right?
Yes. Yes. I mean, one of the most incredible moments of my life. We got to the plantation, but it was surrounded by barbed wire fence. And so we didn't think we were going to be able to get on the land. But thankfully, the owner of the land happened to show up and took us back to a clearing where the gravesite was. And he told us, this is where your ancestors buried each other. And he, there was one headstone that remained, and he had kept it there. And we were impressed by that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was, yeah, it's hard to put into words how much it
Right.
meant, but you're absolutely right. There was no sign on the road that said, here some of the greatest crimes in human history occurred, where they breeded women, where they beat and tortured children, where the U.S. economy was created from forced enslaved labor. There's no marker or sign. You'd never know, and yet this exists here, and it's a shame how much our history has been thrown down the memory hole.
Hey, I'd like to start in the beginning. 2020, Tucker, and you mentioned this in your book, Tucker Carlson happens to have on Chris Rufo, who lives 10 miles from me, and had him on his late night show. Christopher Rufo starts off the interview with, after 6 months of interviewing, of research, I have determined that critical race theory is the problem for everything. And of course, doing his research, Donald Trump happened to watch Fox News, which he did. The next day, Christopher Rufo is, next day or so, showing up in the White House, and we have a proposition, a decree that we're never not going to have any more critical race theory. This is you can't make this stuff up. Am I? That's correct. What I just said is correct, right?
That's right. That's how this whole new era, the CRT scare era, uh, started. It's an incredible story, and it actually has a lot of parallels to the launching of the Red Scare in the McCarthy era. You know, when McCarthy held his press conference and he held up a sheet of paper that says, I have on this paper the names of 205 communists in the US government, and he waved it wildly. And in fact, later turned out he didn't have a single name. It was a total lie. And, but it was used to launch attacks on anybody who questioned inequality in
Right.
America. Anyone who questioned racism in America was labeled a communist and fired from their job, including thousands of teachers, including 400 teachers in New York City alone. And it's a similar situation. It's a revival of a kind of neo-McCarthyist attack on educators today, stemming from this moment where Chris Rufo says that the government has been infiltrated by critical race theory, a term that nobody understood, including himself, and very few teachers have had ever studied or heard of. And yet it was weaponized as a term to attack uh, educators across the country. And just like Joseph McCarthy, who had no names uh, actually of any communists in the government, Christopher Rufo had no real um, examples of critical race theory in the government. Yes, there are people who think that racism is a problem and should be addressed, but very few people in the country had ever heard of critical race theory, and certainly in the government, they weren't using critical race theory as the lens for analyzing race. So, Rufo is just comes from a generic tradition of sophistry where he just props up any kind of right-wing propaganda, and he fancies himself this intellectual, but he's just repackaged what I call uncritical race theory.
Right.
Um, and I'll just end by saying that I feel like you can learn so much about who Rufo is by understanding this quote. He said, in responding to opponents of the Florida bill, for instance, don't argue against teaching diversity and inclusion, but against sexualizing young children, and don't pull your punches. So let's be clear about what Rufo is doing here. He's deliberately equating teachers who are teaching about diversity and inclusion with somebody who is grooming children. And this is not just dishonest, it is deeply dangerous, right? He hopes
Right.
that his inflammatory rhetoric can be used to smear educators as predators for the simple act of teaching about Black history and teaching differences among teaching people to respect and understand people's differences.
Well, I'd like to get back to him. I want to bring Greg in, but before I do, most of the people listen to this podcast rather than watch it. But last time I had a green screen behind me of your class high school in Garfield, one of the best high schools around. And I'm trying to make you feel at home, both you and Greg at home, because this is, can you see the what I have here?
It looks like Joseph McCarthy is on the right. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's McCarthy and it's Nixon. It's the House and America
Nixon on
Committee.
the
And
left.
Greg, with your early affiliations and so forth, you were definitely on the radar like teachers are. I don't know. Is this a compare and contrast? What's your
I,
thought about
I
this?
like the fact that both of you are bringing that up, the parallel between McCarthyism specifically and this battle, this feud over CRT. And in both cases, it's interesting because what's tragic about, if we take McCarthyism, for example, is these kind of insects are always there in America. The McCarthys and Ilks and Rufo and all those kind of people, they're always there. How do they rise? How do they ascend? How do they become prominent? Well, they're kind of allowed. It's kind of allowed to happen. And in most cases, when you look at when they do come to the fore, it's the bankruptcy or the cowardice of liberalism that allows that to happen. And so
Say
I
that
think
again. Say that again,
it's the
Greg.
bankruptcy or the cowardice of liberalism
Oh,
that allows it to
liberalism.
happen,
Okay. Okay.
allows this to rise and to become prominent and dominate the political scene. They're not powerful enough on their own. I mean, Ruffalo's never been voted for by anybody. He ran on anti-communism in Wisconsin and barely won, but he did win, but he never was elected to national office. But they become prominent because others put their heads down and they say, well, this is useful to achieve some of the goals that we want to achieve. In the case of McCarthyism, to push labor down, push it back, stop the assault of labor, the strength of labor, and the role of the Communist Party, which was significant in that labor movement and so on. Today, it's the same kind of thing really going on. That CRT is not really that big of a deal, but it's the fact that the land has a different feel, a different sense, that people's problems were different than that. They had to put this forward again, once again, to kind of disrupt and dislocate people. It's again, it's the bankruptcy and the cowardice of liberals that allow it to happen. They will not speak up. They will not fight it, just as they're not fighting Trump today. I mean,
Yes.
That's your world, isn't it, Jesse? Welcome to your
Yeah.
world. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just published a piece on Truth Out, making that specific point, Greg, that um, Trump is the ugly face of this attack. He's showing his fangs. He wants to, abolish the Department of Education, which could lead to uh, disinvestment of Title I schools serving kids in poverty, and it could eliminate billions of dollars for support for students with special needs. He has passed an executive order to defund schools that teach honestly about race and gender. These are egregious attacks on honest education. But he wouldn't be able to get away with this if it wasn't for the fact that uh, of Democratic Party officials have not launched any kind of serious opposition to this attack on education. I mean, we have thousands of books being banned. The American Library Association uh, detailed over 4,000 books that were banned in 2023, another th over 1,000 titles last year. Uh, we have over 160 teachers were found to have been fired or pushed out of their jobs for teaching about race or gender in a 2022 survey by the Washington Post. And so we know that number is much higher today. It's incredible to see now that almost half of all children in the public schools today go to a school where their teacher is prohibited from teaching the truth about structural racism and Black history, and other topics about oppression. This is a crisis. This is an absolute mind-numbing situation. I mean, you can't learn about this uh, just by looking at history books. You have to read books like 1984 to understand the kind of um, policies they're putting forward to demand ideological conformity amongst the U.S. population. And in the face of these types of bills, where has the Democratic Party opposition been? I mean, we organize an annual Teach Truth Day of Action. This will be our fifth year this year in June. And we've never had the Democratic Party or anybody approach us about how to amplify this. We've never seen this as a major platform point or rallies organized or they occasionally speak out against book banning, um, and oppose some of the most draconian laws from the right. But unfortunately, I think because many of the Democratic Party politicians are also financed by the billionaire class in this country, they are scared about a a youth that are informed about how genocide of Native people and enslavement of African people were the foundations of this country and what that means for today. And students who are learning those truths were in the streets transforming our society in the 2020 uprising. And I think that across the political spectrum, those people at the top of society who serve billionaires were scared of an informed, mobilized, uh, society led by young people who didn't want to be lied to anymore. And so I think you're absolutely right. From the time of McCarthyism, when liberals helped to produce the Red Scare, to our own time, I think we really have to think, how are we going to build independent grassroots social movements that can pressure who's ever in office?
I appreciate you saying it, and I agree wholeheartedly. I had an American history teacher who used to tell us everybody had to take American history in my high school, and she was the one teacher, and she would tell us about going to lynchings in Indiana. That's how crude and vulgar her racism is. That's a level of racism that I think today most people would be ashamed of. But the problem is critical race theory and other honesty. You talk about the truth, and I really appreciate that. It's a kind of an old-fashioned idea. Truth is old-fashioned. We now have narratives instead of truth. But on your point about truth, which you emphasize so much, that runs squarely into the American myth, the mythology of what America is and what it stood for and what it is, what it became, and its whole history and its evolution and development. And most people in this country, not just the racists, not just the Trumpites, most people in this country want to buy in on that story. And that's why they look at their shoes when the right wing goes on the offensive to shut down history, to shut down teaching, because they buy in on that mythology as well. They don't want to see that harmed. I appreciate what you think about that. I think that's part of this too.
Yeah.
I have a quote here. I love your book. You have all these great quotes, throughout Jim Baldwin and this and that. And here's one. I forget which first part of the book. In May 10th, 1933, Nazi brown shirt stormtroopers and university students across Germany threw 25,000 books on bonfires, while giving Hitler salutes and singing Nazi anthems. In Berlin, 40,000 people gathered to hear German Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda Joe Goebbels give a vile anti-Semitic speech. And the speech starts with, "The era of extreme Jewish intellectualism is now at an end." Holy cow. That's when you look at what we're doing right now. Here's another Christopher Rufo quote. We are right now preparing a strategy to of laying siege to the institutions. They they're banning books. They're going after teachers in a McCarthy-like way with these nebulous and I send my kid to school and he comes back as a different sex, myths. And it's happening at an exponential speed. I don't know.
Yeah.
How depressed are you
Well,
about this?
it is a truly uh, baffling and chilling time period where the open attack on honest education has been declared. Um, but being a student of history, I know that this country has never prioritized honesty above power. And my ancestors were banned from being able to read and write. Um, the first anti-literacy law was passed in this country in 1740, and it was a direct response to the Stono Rebellion. A man named Jemmy led an uprising in South Carolina in 1739, and he marched with a banner that declared liberty. And he went plantation to plantation, gathering enslaved people to fight back. Well, when the South Carolina militia put that rebellion down, they not only murdered all of the rebels, they wanted to murder the idea. They wanted to murder the ability of black people to ever write that word liberty again. So the following year, they passed the anti-literacy law that made it punishable by torture and death if you were caught learning to read or write. And those laws spread throughout the slave states. And, that is really the tradition of those who want to suppress knowledge in our country that they stand in. And we stand in the tradition of the enslaved people who snuck off the plantations and went to pit schools or hush harbors and taught each other how to read and write regardless of what the law was. We stand in the tradition of those after the Civil War during Reconstruction when black people actually invented the public school system in this country. There had been, quote, common schools in the North, and yet because they often excluded black people, how public could we really call those schools? And in the South, and during Reconstruction, black people built the public school system, and sometimes they had to rebuild their schools two, three times after the Ku Klux Klan came and burnt the schools down. But my ancestors, including my great grandfather, York Alonzo, went from uh, state to state building schools for black people in in Mississippi and Louisiana and other places. And that's really the history that reveals what's happening right now. We are in a similar struggle for honest education, for access to Black history and Black knowledge, and we're also up against white supremacists who have always been threatened by teaching the truth about history. And that's why states like Florida have, Florida's official state curriculum says that slavery was of, quote, personal benefit to black people. And that's a lie. And we have to fight against it.
Well, there was cardio and and stuff. I mean, it just
Madness.
is it to think that that you have to have as a part of your curriculum some suggestion that there was a benefit, and this is almost like an Onion article, but it's part of it. And speaking of Onion articles, tell us the story about Melissa Temple, a nice little first grade teacher in Wisconsin, and she's beginning her career and loves her kids. And tell us the Rainbow Land
Yeah.
story.
I mean, Melissa Temple is actually a fierce teacher for justice and a veteran educator who's beloved by her community. And, her students for decades just loved her warmth and compassion and her ability to reach kids. And her students were getting ready to put on a musical. She taught first grade, and they decided they wanted to sing a song called Rainbow Land by Miley Cyrus and Dolly Parton. This isn't a radical anthem. This is a pop song. And it doesn't even mention LGBTQ plus people. It just says that we should all be accepted in our societies, right? And uh, the principal banned this song from being sung, and the school district backed up the principal, saying that it could violate their policies around um, rainbow. The rainbow was banned from the schools in her school district, and so she tweeted out on her own time on her personal account from home that she believed her students should have the right to sing this song. And she came into school on Monday, and there was a police officer in the school office with an HR representative who escorted her out of the building, and she never got to see her students again. The relationship she had built all year just severed, and those kids left without any explanation, as if she had abandoned them, when really this system had abandoned them. And it's an outrage that these kinds of neo-McCarthyist attacks are happening on educators all across the country.
And wasn't it that during cleanup time, the kids could pick a song and they would play songs, and she would rotate through that, what song, I mean, and that this was one of their favorites, and they just liked it, and it was their opinion that we want this as our song, but
Yep,
oh, gee,
yep. That's the situation we're in today.
well, and you mentioned in your book too that this is putting a chill that a lot of teachers are freaked out. I mean, my gay teachers that I know are nervous about having a picture of their wife on on their on their desk. There,
Yes.
it's it,
That harkens back to the lavender scare. You know, part of the McCarthy era wasn't just the Red Scare about communism, but it was also the lavender scare. Actually, more federal employees were fired under suspicion of being, quote, homosexual than they were for under accusation of being communist. And Florida was one of the worst perpetrators of the lavender scare. In Florida, you had hundreds of teachers fired, and they were usually single women who were brought before what was called the Johns Committee, and they were interrogated, intrusive questions about their sex lives, um, just appalling board of usually all men, often police involved. And if they didn't like their answers, these women were fired. And we're seeing the lavender scare revived with the don't say gay law, don't say trans law that you have in Florida and increasing number of states, and in Trump's executive order to defund schools that talk openly about gender, of the honest truth, history and science about gender and sexuality, um, is now being banned, and it is absolutely chilling. I mean, today, a survey shows that two out of every three teachers are self-censoring now on issues of race, gender, and sexuality in the classroom out of fear. They've seen teachers who have been doxxed, who have been fired, who have had death threats sent against them. And so many teachers are worried. And at the same time, I would say there's an incredible grassroots growing movement of people fighting back in many ways. One way is by teaching the truth in their classroom, but also by organizing, uh, public displays of resistance.
I look at your book, Education and Capitalism, or it was an
I was,
article in this book,
wrote
chapter
one in the
5.
chat. Yep.
And I like the idea, and I think this is we get diverted by all of these, trans issues or all of these other issues. And the reality is that these are tools that are used for the powerful to control situations, control institutions. And if you look at what's going on right now with Project 2025, it's a continuation of a consolidation of wealth to few people. It's a destruction of unions. It's a destruction of public schools. And the tools that they use to do this, it's like someone saying squirrel, squirrel. They're overemphasizing some of these cultural issues at the expense of looking at systemically the problem, which is perhaps capitalism, perhaps power of institutions, having people lose their ability to participate democratically. I don't know. That's kind of what I got out of your chapter 5
Yeah.
article.
I
Tell me
mean,
about that.
you have a situation today where there's various estimates, but some say like the eight richest people have as much wealth as the bottom half of humanity on the planet. This is an obscenity that has led to, so many problems in our society, from health outcomes, the dramatic disparities in life expectancy, and health and education, and the crushing debt that so many working class people are in. And uh, in order for those at the top, the richest 1% or even less, to create and to control that amount of wealth, it requires a divide and conquer strategy, right? If they can divide the 99% of us into fighting each other, then they can laugh all the way to the bank. And so the crucial way that they maintain their wealth is using racism to pit white working class people against black people and other people of color, using transphobia to say your problem isn't that the rich are hoarding the wealth that you've produced in society. Your problem is this child who has a different gender identity than was assigned at birth, right? They want to vilify trans children so that you are not paying attention to them picking your pocket. It's despicable. And they do the same with immigrants. Horrific lies against Haitian immigrants were used by Trump and Vance to mobilize their base, and they are now just waging war on immigrants who have contributed so much to society and terrorizing immigrant youth, saying that they will even come into schools and snatch them and kidnap them. This is how they sow fear and division in society. And as long as you are blaming a queer person, a trans person, an immigrant, a black person, you're feeding right into their trap so that they can uh, demobilize you because
Yeah.
there's only eight of them. And it would be very easy for us to surround them and take their money and use it for schools and use it for hospitals and use it for all the things we need to have healthy, thriving lives. It would be so simple, right? But they have perfected their propaganda machine in getting working class people to hate each other based on race, gender, sexuality, ability, and so forth. And they use the media and they use schools. Those are the two primary tools that they have to turn people against each other. And so we have to reclaim those and transform them to be about teaching solidarity, not division.
Yeah, can I get an amen from you, Greg? Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. No, it's very well said. I don't think it can be said better than that. And it's sort of a puzzle to me how if you watch the multimillionaire, billionaire class, the Silicon Valley, uh, what are they?
Tech
Um,
bros.
well, it's that's jargon. They're all ideologically, they're all like anarchists. They're all libertarian.
Libertarian.
And you see them all, and you see the mainstream corporate leaders for the big monopoly corporations and so on. They all have DEI, or they had DEI um, organizations. They had people assigned to DEI, and as soon as Trump gets elected, they all retreat. They all run away, and they all ran to Trump. I mean, they don't care about anything. The lesson, of course, is a simple lesson. It's not a complicated lesson. All they care about is money.
Mm.
I mean, they could be a Democrat one day and a Republican the next day, a Trumpite one day, a liberal the next. Whatever allows them, as you stated so well, to hang on to their money and they're going to continue to accumulate capital. That's all they're about. If
Yeah.
we could, and you're right, Jesse, if we could just get that message out to people. So my question is, have you heard that message from anybody in the Democratic Party?
Yeah, we were before you got on, we were just nothing but just being angry at how impotent the Democratic Party has been to counter this force. To just say,
We in Pittsburgh this May, we have a primary coming up, the Democratic Party primary for a mayoral election, and it'll be lively. But nobody will stand up with that position. The positions you just enunciated will not be on the agenda, will not be spoken, and it won't be spoken in the next election nationally. It won't be spoken in gubernatorial elections. And until
Yeah.
it's spoken, I don't see much.
And
Who's going to
you know,
speak it?
you
yeah,
know, it can sound radical when we say that the Democrats have no plan for fighting Trump and they're capitulating, but in fact, the Democrats are saying that themselves about their own party. There was a
mm,
headline in the February 2nd New York Times. Check this headline out. It says, quote, "We have no coherent message, colon, Democrats struggle to oppose Trump." And then the subheadline continues, "More than 50 interviews with Democratic leaders revealed a party struggling to decide what it believes in, what issues to prioritize, and how to confront an aggressive right-wing administration." So at best, the party is confused and demobilized and capitulating. Often they are actually actively, uh, opposing things like um, anti-racist education. And yeah, it's really not a party that's organized to defend working people. And I think that we have to understand that the fight against oppression, right? The fight against racism, the fight against transphobia and xenophobia is part of the fight for a whole different society where the people who do the work enjoy the fruits of their labor. Because if we don't fight against every form of oppression, then the divide and conquer strategy works. And so trans people need to know that cis people have their backs, or why would they join with us in struggle, right?
Right.
Black people need to know that white people have their backs, or why would we join with them in struggle? And so, every community needs to build the struggle, and education can be a lightning rod because it's a place where you can show your solidarity with every community by demanding that their history be taught. And that can help to knit together diverse communities into, um, you know, uh, coherent efforts for solidarity. And that is what they fear the most, is when we link arms across difference and we join together in united uprisings. And that, I think, is coming uh, as Trump overreaches. But we have to do everything we can to support it with actions like the Teach Truth Day of Action on June 7th.
Who's going to be worse in the Department of Education, Linda McMahon or Betsy DePaul? It's a tough one, isn't it? It's a tough
Oh,
I
one.
mean,
there's
Linda
Arnie
McMahon,
Duncan. Arnie Duncan.
yeah, Arnie
Throw him in the
Duncan was
mix too.
also a
Arnie Duncan
disaster.
was bad. Arnie
He,
Duncan.
We
He
forget,
was a
don't we? We forget that he was a
remember
private.
Duncan said that the best thing that happened to the New Orleans public schools was Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
And it is just an absolutely
horrible, horrible.
horrific statement, because he believed because it wiped out the public schools and they were able to then replace them with 100% charter schools and privatize education, that was a victory. Yeah, and Betsy DeVos having a billionaire, she was horrific. And then just today, McMahon was in hearings for her confirmation, and she said she wasn't sure if it would be legal to teach Black history. That's
Okay.
what we're
All
up
right. All
against.
right. We had on a fellow who wrote a book called Xenophobia, who was looking at how the Howard Zinns,
People's history of the United
people's
States.
history of the United States, that how that book, the criticism of it, when he looked at, he was a philosophy professor and kind of, really fastidious researcher. He looked at all of the criticisms of the people that were uh, writing bad reviews about the book and found out that they were just making stuff up. That what they
Yeah.
said was not really what he was saying, and he did word counts, he did word clouds, he did all this stuff, and it became quite apparent that people are very afraid of Howard Zinn, and they're very afraid of how he looks at the United States. It and that is why I think your Zen education project is so powerful. You're inextricably linked to the Zen education project. And tell us about that, and tell us how you think that might be an antidote to some of this too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that Howard Zinn's book, A People's History of the United States, is an incredible contribution to understanding our past because in it frames the people who have been left out of the story, right? Too many corporate textbooks tell history as a series of events from generals and uh, presidents and corporate titans. And what Howard Zinn does is tell the history of the country from their perspective of those who have been marginalized and oppressed. So he tells the story of slavery through those who were enslaved, the story of colonization through the indigenous people who were colonized, the story of the Mexican American War, not just through the President Polk who declared the war, but through the soldiers who defected to the Mexican side because they saw how illegal the war was, right? And these are the types of stories that have been hidden and buried and cut out of the textbooks. And that's why A People's History is one of the most popular books this country has ever seen, sold millions of copies. And the Zen Education Project takes the same approach to teaching a people's history by looking at those who have been oppressed and marginalized and developing interactive lesson plans that engage students in thinking critically about history of those people who have been left out. And this is what frightens uh, the people I call uncritical race theorists the
Right.
most.
That we should have started with you talking about uncritical race theory because that's the kind of the key to your book. Give us a overview of uncritical race theory and how you came up with that term.
Yeah, I mean, this massive attack on critical race theory, one of their primary arguments is that teachers are politicizing the classroom by teaching about Black history. And that only makes sense if you believe that it's a neutral and objective position uh, to hide Black history, to hide structural racism in the classroom. And so I wanted to reveal the fact that they're not arguing for replacing critical race theory with an objective and neutral viewpoint. They have their own highly developed theory of race that they would like to hide. They would not like you to know that they have a theory and that they're just wanting to replace one theory with another, right? And so we need to name the fact that they do have a theory. It's uncritical race theory, and that is a tradition of thought that said that Black people were not human beings, that comes out of a eugenics movement that said that uh, Black people were not as uh, evolved as white people. And, post-civil rights movement, some of those more open explanations of racism fell out of favor, but they have rehabilitated their white supremacist views with these attacks on critical race theory. And so, uncritical race theory today is a system of thought that denies that structural racism exists, that says that it primarily impacts white people or reduces understandings of racism to just interpersonal differences or somebody using the N-word rather than the structural oppression that exists with the racial wealth gap, with uh, lack of quality education, with um,
Mass incarceration.
mass incarceration for sure, right? All of these structural forms of racism that are denied by uncritical race theorists. So that my hope is that this term uncritical race theory is useful to those of us in a struggle for honest education and for social justice because it helps one reveal that they have a theory of race that needs to be named, and the origins of their theory need to be studied and understood. And number two, it points out something that we were talking about earlier, that it's not just the right wing that benefits from suppressing the truth, that all billionaires, liberal and conservative, and their political puppets uh, benefit from this. So when we talk about the attack on anti-racist teaching, it is being spearheaded by the right, but it's being tacitly supported by liberals in power as well. And so instead of just saying that this attack is from the right, we can talk about how this attack is from critical race we can talk about how this is an attack by uncritical race theorists across the political divide. And we can name and understand that theory.
Well said. Hey, we're getting close to the end here, but I can't leave without getting your opinion about the Super Bowl halftime show.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I loved it for many reasons. I know it went over some people's heads
Oh,
who thought who just saw the American flags and thought, "Oh, this is patriotism," and turned off. Like some people were ultra left on it, saying, "Oh, this is patriotism. I'm not going to watch." And then, of course, the right wing was freaking out because it was an
yes.
open expression of black culture on the biggest stage. But I loved it. I thought that number one, having Samuel L. Jackson play Uncle Sam and represent America, and have the genius of Kendrick Lamar be aimed in opposition to Uncle Sam was an incredible way to
Right.
tell a story about the
I,
struggle that Black people have always had in this
I
country.
I gotta tell you this, Jesse. I don't know how whole I've got a couple of kids that are late 30s, early 40s, and they're, pretty nice. I love them dearly, and they're politically a little more evolved than. So I'm watching the game with them, and I'm sitting there like, well, I can't understand a word they're saying. Well, what's this going on? Well, blah blah blah. And then after the fact, I actually did some research on what he was saying and all of the Compton thing and the Crips and the
Yeah.
Bloods and the
So many
lawsuits and
messages
sticking up the power. And I thought
embedded.
this was brilliant. But
Yes.
my
And then,
my first impression was just that my first impression was I got a Reagan announcement. I got to yell at people to get off my lawn. Like I don't know.
well, I'm glad you did your research
Yeah, it
because
was good. It was good.
embedded so many subversive messages within that. And then to have one of his dancers pull out a flag for Palestine and for Sudan was to me the highlight and the MVP of the Super Bowl.
Serena doing her dance. She did her
Yes.
dance, which got this huge backlash, and then she's that, and I don't know it. I you can criticize it, but I think it goes to the fact of how we're so polarized that immediately it was just like this was horrible, the worst thing ever, or
Well, I just think because Trump hated it so much and left, and that so much of the MAGA crowd were upset, I think Kendrick did his job.
yeah, yeah. Well, anyway, well that's that. Any final thoughts, Greg, before we let Jesse get back to work?
I think he said it very, very well. I mean, he's got his finger on the pulse of the answers. I mean, he has the answers. I just don't know. I guess in my old age and some of my, um, I guess, depression around the way things are going, I'm not sure I see a way out of the mess we're in. Only because we're only allowed two options, two-party system, and I don't see that as evolving. So until we can break out of that kind of thinking, we're locked into suffering through because the Democrats are waiting in the sidelines until for 2 years, and then they just say, well, they'll give it to us because these guys will screw it up so badly,
Yeah.
and they have no answers, they have no hope. We're in a bad place. We're in a bad place.
There's no doubt about it. we're in a bad place when Elon Musk salutes Hitler at the inauguration, when the Secretary of Education, who's being proposed, wants to ban Black history courses, when they're raiding schools to kidnap immigrant youth. These are bleak times, no doubt. And yet, if my ancestors could overthrow slavery, if my ancestors could overthrow Jim Crow segregation, I know we got this. And there's going to be another uprising, uh, and, bigger than what happened in 2020. The question for me is, do we organize those people across the country into ongoing sustained efforts and organizations that can build a challenge to the two-party system, that can build a challenge to the oligarchy, and build working class multiracial power that is learning about the root causes of our problem in racial capitalism and recruiting people to the struggle. And to do that, we have to be able to teach the truth, both in the classroom and in the social movements.
Uh, pick up the book. Pick up the book. And Greg, before you stick your head in the oven and turn on the gas, here's a summary of the Teach Truth movement and the book Teach Truth. Honest history in education, check. That's good. Zen, so forth. Opposition to censorship, resist that. Inclusive curriculum, empower educators. Stand by your union, schools, teachers, and then in community engagement, get involved. That's a reasonable game plan for a start.
Great
Yeah,
place to start.
great
Go to
place to
Zen
start.
Education Project, look up our Teach Truth campaign, and organize a historical walking tour or tabling event with banned books on the National Day of Action. Uh, it's a great way to get involved. And if you're not a student or a parent, there's a group called Heal Together that is doing organizing community members in the fight for honest education to help repeal laws that ban teaching the truth.
Good. Jesse, thank you. You're one of my rock stars. Keep at it, keep teaching, and maybe we'll have you back in a year or so when you do something else.
Your next book.
You know,
Your next
Right
book is
on.
out.
Right on.
if you're not in Cuba in some jail and around, or whatever, just
Oh
hope
man,
that's not the case.
hope not.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right, take
Thanks,
care, y'all.
Jesse.